What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Sunday Night Football Pre-Lock Show here on RotoGrinders. Happy to be with you for Week 15. Sunday Night Football, we've got the New York Giants and the Washington Commanders facing off in what is maybe not necessarily the most exciting of football games, but a relatively important game in the NFC playoff picture. We've got both of these teams at 7-5-1. Of course, they tied the first time they met, and these two teams would be the final two wild cards in the NFC as of right now. And then you've got the Seahawks and the Lions right behind them, both at 7-7. The loser of this game will be 7-6-1. The winner will be 8-5-1 with the head-to-head tiebreaker. Unless they happen to tie for a second time. But so it's an important game in terms of the landscape of the NFL, and that makes it a little bit more interesting to watch, especially when you throw some DFS action on top of it. So we'll break it down here for you. We've got about 35 minutes or so until the games start, and we hope you can take down some money tonight in DFS. And to help me break it down, we've got TJ Zwarych alongside. I am Justin Van Zuiden, STL Cardinals 84. TJ, how is your Sunday going?
It's going pretty well. 2 expert surveys. This is my 4th RG show of the day so far. 1 for NBA, 3rd for NFL. So busy day, but managed to take down 2nd place in my very first ever underdog daily fantasy draft. So overall, very positive, profitable day, and hopefully we can keep it going for the night slate.
Yeah, it's good. Nice to hear that you had a good afternoon there. It was kind of a wonky early slate, but almost all the games today were competitive. We had a couple overtime games, a couple surprises, and it was a compelling day in terms of the way a lot of these games finished out. Of course, we had a walk-off defensive touchdown on the final play of regulation for the Raiders. The Bucs blowing a 17-point lead, but yet somehow staying in first place in the NFC South. I mean, what is the division winner going to end up with for a record in that division? It's just kind of laughable at this point. But it was an entertaining day of football, and we will see if the game tonight can top that with what would currently be the last 2 playoff teams in the NFC, in the Giants and the Commanders. They played pretty much a close game throughout and finished in a tie, the first head-to-head battle between these teams. It should be a competitive one again tonight. We've got the Commanders favored by a little more than a field goal at home in this game. How do you see this game playing out as far as your exposure to both teams? Are you looking to target one side more so than the other? Just how do you think the game is going to go tonight before we dig into the individual players?
So I think this is going to be kind of a close, grinded out type game, similar to what we saw last time. The team I'm looking to target the most, and it's mostly just because of a pricing thing for a lot of their players, is I think the Giants pass catchers. I really like the prices of a lot of these guys, and so they're going to be where I'm looking to go for some value. Play some Daniel Jones, play some Taylor Heineke, some Saquon Barkley, Terry McLaurin. But I think this one's going to be a close one. I don't think either team's going to come away with a blowout, and from a pricing standpoint, I'm liking a lot of the Giants receivers.
Yeah, so we'll break down those guys here in a little bit. You do have some very moderate price tags on pretty much everybody in that Giants passing game. So, and part of what makes this game interesting is the fact that there is no slam dunk captain play on DraftKings. And a lot of times you get a couple guys that are at that 30%, 25% ownership mark. We don't have anybody above 18% here. And then we've got, 7 guys at 5% plus. And I think an interesting, it's hard to kind of narrow down your exposure. So if you're building like 100 lineups on this slate, I think my biggest tip is don't be afraid to take some stands. You don't want to take all of these guys and play 10% of them at the captain. You got to take an overweight stance on some players, an underweight stance on some players. Otherwise, basically you're just churning through the rake and not giving yourself a high likelihood of finishing at the top of these top-heavy GPPs. So don't be afraid to take some stands on some players, go with one guy over another, even though it might be a little bit difficult to make some of those decisions. I think that does become important given the way that things are kind of going to be spread out in terms of ownership on this slate. So as we start to go through kind of captain thoughts, is there anybody you feel strongly about, either to the good or the bad?
My favorite one, I think, is going to be Terry McLaurin, just because of the salary saving options he gives. I think like the biggest one I'd be looking to pivot away from would be Saquon Barkley, just because of how limited your lineups are when you play him in that captain position over on DraftKings. McLaurin, we know he's going to get targets and looks as long as Taylor Heineke is the quarterback. He loves him. I think he averages well over 15 fantasy points in his career per game with Taylor Heineke as the starting QB. So McLaurin is my favorite option. And then if I wasn't very confident with that one, just because, he's a receiver, I want to get more locked in points, more touches, my next choice would be Daniel Jones.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You don't have a lot of captain ownership on the quarterbacks here. Together, we've got, 15% on Jones, 7% on Heineke. So together, just 22% ownership in the captain for the two quarterbacks, which is lower than you would see on the normal showdown slate. So I like McLaurin as well. I think, especially with the full PPR on DraftKings, he's probably my favorite. Agree with the thoughts on the quarterbacks as well. I like them maybe a little bit more in terms of MVP when we get over to FanDuel, but they're fine in the captain on DraftKings as well. And then I think you take your pick maybe to add in your favorite of the Washington running backs. And it's going to be a little bit tricky because obviously Robinson is getting a little bit more of the early down work. If you think they'll play with a lead, he's probably the best option. If you think they're playing from behind, maybe Gibson's the best option. And I think you got to that's one of the spots where I'm going to take a stand. I'm going to play a lot of Robinson. I'm not going to play as much Gibson. We've got Robinson at lower ownership. He's slightly more expensive, but doesn't break the bank. I mean, you compare Robinson at $12K to Barkley at $18,300. It's just, as TJ mentioned, difficult to get those Barkley captain lineups where that leaves you with $6,300 per player for the rest of your spots. Whereas if you go with Robinson, you're at $7,600. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility with the rest of your lineup. So McLaurin, quarterbacks, Brian Robinson, I think, are my top choices at captain. Anything else you want to add there before we move along and talk about some of these flex plays?
So it's very similar to what you said. Just something I kind of want to harp on is I like Brian Robinson better than Antonio Gibson at the captain position. And when I'm doing that, I like making sure I have the Washington defense on that team, maybe getting Heineke in there as well, playing for the Washington to be ahead in this game. And I do like Gibson more in the in the flex position, using him when I have Heineke in the captain and making sure that like my lineups where I'm playing Washington playing from behind, that's when I have Antonio Gibson, and I don't mind pairing him with Heineke. Whereas Robinson, if I'm using him in the flex, I'm probably not going to have very many of the Washington pass catchers. And if I'm using him in the captain, I want to make sure I have Washington's defense on that team as well.
All right, so let's kind of go through the positions here and talk about who we might want to have for flex exposure. Hit that like button if you're watching us on YouTube, and we'll kind of do a build off to the side here in a minute. But let's assume that we are captaining McLaurin for now. And then, where are we going to go with our flex exposure? Both quarterbacks around the same price. Daniel Jones maybe gives you a little bit more with his legs. You can see we've also got a little more ownership, a little higher projection on Daniel Jones as well. Do you play both of them? If we're in theory building a lineup with McLaurin at captain, what are you doing with the quarterbacks?
If I have McLaurin at the captain, I'm making sure I get Heineke in there. And then, to be honest, I think Daniel Jones is kind of my next priority. They're not overly expensive in this spot, and so I think I do want to be jamming in both of my quarterbacks into my kind of optimal style lineup.
Well, let's see what that does for us in terms of salary. It is definitely doable. So if we go with Heineke, or no, we were going McLaurin at the captain, sorry. Let's see, McLaurin at captain, both quarterbacks in the flex. We got $5,000 per player. I think that's plenty doable on this slate. And then we kind of got to talk about value, and then we can go around and fill in the rest of our spots. So the guys that are maybe getting some love for value would be, say, Nick Vannett at $200. And then, you got the Commanders defense at 3,800. You've got the kickers in a game that could feature plenty of stalled drives. You got the Giants D. You've got, and you talked about the Giants pass catchers. Richie James is pretty cheap. Hodgins is pretty cheap. So what are you doing in terms of value to make this work with McLaurin and both quarterbacks in there?
Not to give away the entire lineup, but by far my favorite value options, and they do kind of fit quite perfectly with this, are Joey Sly, the kicker, and then Richie James Jr. and Isaiah Hodgins. But all of those fit this lineup quite well. I don't think you got to go all the way down to the $200 range. If you do, I don't think there's anything wrong with Nick Vannett taking a shot on Diami Brown, but
the question becomes whether or not you want Barkley. If you want Barkley, you got to play Nick Vannett or Diami Brown.
Yeah.
If you don't play Barkley, then you can kind of sit in that middle range that you were just talking. So that becomes the decision point, I think. If you're starting a lineup like this, do you want Barkley? Do you not want Barkley? And you think it's optimal to have kind of the stars and scrubs, or to go with those kind of mid-range Richie James?
Maybe I'm overthinking it, but no Chase Young in this spot. I think Washington is going to be looking to stack the box going up against Barkley. Barkley played less than 50% of snaps last week. Yes, it was a blowout, but he's also been dealing with a little bit of injury lately. He's just so expensive that I think we can put together a solid lineup without him. For me, I'm kind of looking at, we'll get to this a bit more on FanDuel, but I want to look to either build my lineups with Barkley to be just exploding, or just try and fade him. And so I like captaining him or MVPing him or going without him. And I think in this spot, it's optimal to fade. I love going with Sly, Hodgins, and who's the other one I meant? Richie James in this spot. But if you do want to go cheap, Nick Vannett, I don't hate the idea of Diami Brown. But my favorite thing I think to do is just stick with this mid-range value and mess around with the Giants receivers, the Daniel Bellingers, kickers, defenses, and as well as somebody like a Jahan Dotson, I think is very interesting as well for tournaments. But I would rather go, even Cam Sims, if you wanted to go the punt build, I think is fine. But I really like the mid-range better.
And that's interesting. If you guys have watched these for any length of time, on a lot of slates, TJ has sided with getting that punt guy in there to make everything else work. So a little bit of a different approach. Obviously, every slate is different. And I kind of hop back and forth. I mean, Bellinger was questionable. If he would be out, if he would have been out, then obviously Nick Vannett would have become the Vannett and jam in Barkley would have become a lot more optimal. Now I think I can side either way. And I do like Dotson a lot for tournaments as well. I mean, you can see, we've only got Dotson projected 1 point less than Curtis Samuel, and we've got Samuel with about 10% more in terms of ownership. So, that's one of the spots where I'm going to take a stand. I like Samuel is projected for 30, or in terms of his prop, 30.5 receiving yards. Dotson 31.5. They both have similar touchdown odds. So, give me the lower owned guy and slightly cheaper guy in Dotson as well, who's coming off a solid game himself. Obviously, game flow, matters for him, and he maybe isn't on the field as much in close games, but he did have 9 targets last week, and maybe he continues to see his role expand there. So,
and something I want to touch on is in this specific build where it's the one we were looking at. When you have Terry McLaurin as your MVP or your captain, it makes more sense to go with Richie James or Isaiah Hodgins in that spot. However, if you have Daniel Jones, it makes sense to have those pass catchers there too. But if you're rolling with Taylor Heineke as your captain, then it makes a lot more sense to go with the Jahan Dotsons instead of the Giants pass catchers there, because if Heineke's your MVP, you're assuming he's going to be throwing some touchdowns, and you want to have the Washington pass catchers alongside him at the captain position.
Yeah, definitely correlate that. However, it's best for your lineup, and there's a lot of those receivers are similar in terms of price. Um, I mean, are you playing any of the tight end? Like we've always talked about tight ends on Showdown, but like Bellinger's 6,200 and he's banged up. Logan Thomas is 5K. I mean, they project for fewer points than the kickers. Like, are you playing the tight ends here at all?
Just because of Bellinger's ownership and Logan Thomas's ownership, that's what gives me interest in them. Is yes, the prices are too high, but that's also keeping the ownership down. And so I really like Bellinger in my lineups where I have Daniel Jones as the captain, and I really like Logan Thomas as in my lineups with Taylor Heineke as the captain. But I'm probably not going to be playing them outside of that. I would rather just go the full punt with Vanette, Mayorik, or even John Bates.
Yeah, those cheap tight ends, if they fall in the end zone, it's a nice little bonus if you're playing them at 200, 400, 600 bucks. All right, so we got 8:20 is lock tonight, so we are 19 minutes away from lock. We'll certainly take your questions in the YouTube chat and in the RotoGrinders Discord. If you have them, feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll get to them in just a second, and we will also pivot over to talk about FanDuel.
30 likes on YouTube, and I stop yawning. But otherwise, I've been on 4 shows today, and I will continue to yawn. Sometimes when I'm in the middle of speaking, unless we have 30 likes. That'll get me hyped up, and I'll stop yawning.
It's the end of a long Sunday for TJ, so hit the thumbs up button for him and perk him up a little bit. So we'll head over and talk about FanDuel here in a second. But before we do that, if you have not heard of Stat Hero, check them out. Unique fantasy sports platform over at Stat Hero allows users to compete only against the house and not against the other players in the contest. You can participate in head-to-head style leagues where Stat Hero provides a lineup that you have to beat with your own, and pick'em style contests as well. And you can also check out the Big Dime League, a season-long NFL leaderboard contest with up to $50,000 in prizes, which you can enter all season long. First-time depositors, as you can see on your screen there, a 50% bonus match up to $250 by using promo code Grinders. So check them out over at Stat Hero. Download the app, or you can play live on their Stat Hero website. So check that out. All right, TJ, anything else on this DraftKings build? I mean, what's your rank your interest in the defenses? Do you like the kickers more? Do you like the defenses more? Does it depend on your build type?
It'll depend on my build type. When I have when I'm running back heavy, I'll want to make sure I mix in those defenses in there. If I'm going Saquon MVP, I'll mix in some Giants D. If I'm going Brian Robinson MVP, I'll mix in some Commanders D. But overall, my favorite by a fairly large margin is going to be Joey Sly, and then I'd put Graham Gano number 2.
But I think we learned from the Vikings-Colts game yesterday that you just have to play the defense and stack the opposing offense, and it works every time. That's rarely works in DFS, but if you did it on the Saturday slate, where the Colts managed some defensive touchdowns and blew a 33-0 lead, but still scored a bunch of fantasy points along with the Minnesota skill players, it was a good day for you. So I say that in jest. Obviously, you don't often want to play the defense along with a bunch of players from the opposing team, but did work if you played that Saturday showdown slate with the Vikings.
I even think a Joey Sly captain lineup is a reasonable contrarian style lineup tonight.
Go field goals. Yeah, he does grade out really well in our projections for a kicker, and in terms of optimal. If you look at our down sims, which you can do if you're a premium subscriber, you'll be surprised at how well Joey Sly grades out in those builds tonight. All right, let's talk about FanDuel here, and the first thing I want to do is something similar to what we did last week, where if you try to build that same type of lineup, if I try to go Daniel Jones, Heineke, McLaurin, Robinson, you can't do that on FanDuel. You can't. We could get all 4 of these guys conceivably in a DraftKings lineup. You can't do it on FanDuel because it leaves you with 3,500, and the FanDuel salary floor is 5K. So it makes those min salary punts like Nick Vanette a little less interesting. Bellinger's maybe a little better play on FanDuel where he's 6,500. But point is that you can't play all the studs on FanDuel like you can on DraftKings. Makes it even harder to get Barkley in there. But we're going to have to sacrifice like one of the big name plays. So if you got a guy that you maybe feel like a little more comfortable leaving out of the FanDuel lineup where it's only half point PPR, who are you going underweight on as far as these big name guys on FanDuel?
You nailed it with Daniel Jones at MVP. He's my favorite to go with today. I still like the Saquon fade. For me, from this lineup, we're cutting Brian Robinson. We have Daniel Jones in there anyways. We need to get more Giants in to kind of correlate with him at the MVP. Yes, it's ideal if he runs one in, but we probably want to get a couple pass catchers in there as well. When we look at the salary of the Giants receivers, my favorite by so far is Richie James. I think I'd probably lock him in today in FanDuel. Like I'd want to get as much Richie James exposure as possible because that 8K price tag is just so valuable, and the fact that he's only getting 17% ownership is wild to me. Because where we have the higher pricing floor, we just need the salary savings so much. And so Richie James is my favorite option here by far to save some salary. We plug him in at 8K, and then we have plenty of options to fill out our lineup any way we like. Obviously, I talk a lot about liking Joey Sly. That'd be kind of my favorite one for optimals to plug in there. But you have any of the tight ends who are great salary saving options today. We talked about Daniel Bellinger. Well, he's almost the exact same price on FanDuel as he is on DraftKings. I think he's a phenomenal play here. Daniel Bellinger at 6.5, I think, is a great play. Logan Thomas, I think, is an awesome play. So I'm looking at James, Sly as my two favorite salary savers, and then Jahan Dotson and the tight ends as my next favorite salary saving options.
Yeah, again, Sly projects pretty well. We got him projected for 9.4 points, and he's been remarkably consistent. Washington does kick a lot of field goals, so you see his production kind of over the last 6 games in the double digits quite a bit, almost always in that 8+ range, 9, 8, 12, 19, 6, 5, 11. So been a pretty good couple of months for the kicking game there for Washington. I certainly think he's fine from an optimal build perspective, and then also in GPP builds. We've got plenty of time here, so we've still got 13 minutes left until lock. Again, drop your questions in the YouTube chat. I know TJ's been answering some of them as we go, but we can throw them on the air as well for people who may not be following along with the chat. And then, I guess we can talk about some other types of builds too, like any interest in, a one-team domination type of build? If so, is Washington the better side for that? I guess, how would you go about building, say, your favorite game script domination type of lineup here?
So, in terms of my favorite way to play tonight, to me, this doesn't really feel like an MME type single game slate. My favorite way to run it would be that lineup we talked about with Daniel Jones, Heineke, McLaurin, and then on FanDuel, I don't want to say exactly, but I would round it out with those other two I said were my favorite plays, and I would play a ton of double ups, a ton of single entries, quintuple ups, and stuff like that, and just because I really feel confident about that lineup in just terms of doing well. Now it'll get duped. Random things happen. It may not win first by any means, but I feel really good about it cashing. And so that's probably how I'd handle this slate. But in terms of getting different, if I was running a lot of lineups, I think my favorite way to do it would be like firing some kickers and some defenses in there at captain. But I prefer, I would just be very intent on very focused on game script today, less on the value of the players and very focused on the game script. So Daniel Jones at the MVP, loading it up with Washington, Green Bay. Geez, can't speak today. Too many
Packers
shows.
Play tomorrow. Nobody's looking forward to it. They're playing the Rams. Exactly. Baker in primetime part 2.
And so Giants, and just loading it up with the Giants and firing just Brian Robinson on that team, or just Antonio Gibson on that team, just Terry McLaurin. I think that's a very interesting way of going about it today. And then the other way I don't mind doing it either is you roll Heineke as your MVP and you play McLaurin, you play Dotson, you play Logan Thomas. You just go your full out. Maybe he throws 3 or 4 touchdowns today, and like Dotson's not getting much ownership at all. Thomas isn't getting much ownership at all. You can still fit in a Saquon Barkley on that team as your one giant, and get away with filling like out the rest of your players with just Washington pass catchers alongside Heineke. So I would just be very intent with the players I select, making sure that they fit my scripts today. It's less about the value of plays. The two values I would specifically be seeking out in most of my lineups would be Richie James and Joey Sly. But outside of that, just very focused on, does this lineup correlate with how I think with a game script that would work? Do I think Brian Robinson and Washington defense with Joey Sly and one Washington or New York pass catcher is going to be optimal? No. But I do think that's going to be more unique. And so I'd want to make sure if I'm playing Brian Robinson, I'm in my captain or my MVP, I'm making sure the rest of the lineup correlates to it.
Is there a scenario in that type of game script? Like, is there a scenario where you would play Robinson and Gibson in the same lineup, or not so much, given that maybe Gibson has more value if they're trailing?
I would be okay with it if I was playing a ton of lineups, but otherwise that'd be it. Like, I'd be okay with going Gibson and Robinson in a Commanders captain type spot, Commanders defense captain type spot. I think that if I had that, I would definitely want to play both running backs. But other than that, like, I wouldn't be going out of my way to do it.
Yeah, let me see how that. I went back over to DraftKings with the extra spot and the salary multiplier. I think it's definitely more viable on DraftKings, that type of strategy, than it is on FanDuel. So let me get back to DraftKings here, and we'll load up kind of an example of how that might look, and then we'll peek and we can go through some questions. Got about 7 minutes left in here until lineup lock. So, all right, let me get out of what I had before. And then if we go, so we had talked about Commanders defense in the captain. So they're going to be down quite a ways. Did I go past them?
Something I want to touch on quick, just as I was looking back out at questions, and one of the first one we had in there, as per usual, Big Hurt, our guy in there, it's asking favorite FanDuel single entry MVP, and it is Daniel Jones, but favorite GPP for like contrarian MVP. It's not super contrarian, but it's way more contrarian than it should be. It's Terry McLaurin by far. Like, he's our favorite on DraftKings because of the salary, but we're still playing him as excited as we are about Daniel Jones and Taylor Heineke for the same price over there. Well, on FanDuel, we're looking at 20% MVP ownership for Daniel Jones, 10 to 15 for Taylor Heineke, and we're projecting 8 for McLaurin right now, which is the 6th most behind both quarterbacks and all 3 running backs. I think he is by far the best GPP captain on FanDuel based on how the ownership is currently laying out.
Yeah, I think people get worried about the half-point PPR, but since McLaurin can do a lot of his damage on some big plays, I think that's maybe a little less nerve-wracking for him. He's certainly capable of putting up a big performance, even with the scoring format on FanDuel, maybe not quite to what we would usually like for a wide receiver in terms of full PPR scoring. So I don't mind McLaurin over there either, and you can see I've kind of done a little sample here of what it would look like if we did that Commanders domination type of build. So you put Commanders D in the captain, then you put both Robinson and Gibson. Maybe you're rolling, Daniel Jones with one pass catcher, Slayton or Richie James, and that lineup it works pretty easily. You can see even if I do that, I still have over 13K left for my final spot. So salary isn't going to really become an issue, and you can obviously leave salary on the table in Showdown. That is always a viable strategy for your Showdown builds. All right. Reggae Joe had asked in the YouTube chat, is Richie James playable on FanDuel? Certainly he is. Even with the half-point PPR, I think he's fine on FanDuel as well. Scott Walker, who would be your DK captain choice in cash games? So this is going to be a tough decision for a lot of people. I mean, we got the ownership pretty close on Jones, McLaurin, and Barkley. I think from our conversation earlier, seems like you prefer Barkley or prefer McLaurin in kind of optimal builds for captain.
McLaurin is my very narrow favorite to Daniel Jones, and then Taylor Heineke would be my third choice. And someone also just asking, is Barkley a must? As crazy as it sounds, I think Barkley is a must fade in optimal lineups today. I don't think the value works. Now, he's a great tournament option still because he has the highest ceiling on the slate by far. But I think with that hefty price tag on both sites, we're kind of missing some value. My favorite option is to play both QBs and to fade Saquon Barkley tonight.
Yeah, Barkley's going to be polarizing, I think, just because, some people will think that the snaps dip last week was just because of the blowout. Some will think that the injury is a concern. It's obviously, not the most ideal matchup, but, he had 18 for 63 and a touchdown a couple weeks ago when these teams met. Certainly, if he's healthy, he's going to get his touches. I do think that the game will start with the teams playing it close to the vest. I think we'll see a lower scoring first half. Maybe it opens up after halftime, particularly if one team falls behind. So I think, if you want to roll the conservative game approach early on, I certainly think that might work. Dan Janning was also asking, what does a kicker captain look like on DraftKings? And TJ had mentioned that was something he was interested in earlier. So if we say we captain Joey Sly, you've got 8,800. Like if you play both kickers and a defense and you just go for this lower scoring game, like I've got 12K per player. Basically, I can fill out my last 3 spots with anybody I want. And, and probably still have salary left on the table, right? Because Barkley's the only guy that costs anything close to what I have left per player. So kicker captain, a lower scoring game type of build like this one, you're almost definitely going to have salary left on the table, which is fine. I mean, not as many people will be building this lineup with both kickers and a defense. So certainly something you can look at in tournaments tonight.
Somebody just brought up in chat the idea of playing John Dotson as a MVP on FanDuel. Slate breaking potential, very low owned. I think that's super interesting. Like if I was running 10 lineups, just like nothing high dollar, but just like hand building a couple lineups in the prime time, like whatever it is, 100K, 200K to first. I think that is a super interesting MVP choice. Like I'd probably make most of them, like I'd do my Daniel Jones, my Heineke's, and my McLaurin teams, but then I'd probably mess around and do a Dotson one, a James one, and a Hodgson ones as well. And I think Dotson is actually the most interesting one. Just make sure you got Heineke in your lineup, and then maybe that's when you're looking to fade McLaurin and try and get like a Saquon Barkley in there.
Yeah, I don't mind that. I like Dotson quite a bit on both sites tonight as a tournament play, so I can get behind that. I mean, a couple guys we didn't really talk that much about. Like we didn't talk about Slayton, and I know he's more expensive, but where do you stand on him? I guess before we wrap everything up here.
I like Slayton a lot for tournaments. Obviously, he's priced up, so he's tougher to get to than some of the other Giants receivers. But from a raw points perspective, I probably like him best of the 3. I'm not playing any Kenny Golladay today. I'm only playing Slayton, James, and Hodgins from that receiving core. And from a raw points perspective, I like Slayton the best. However, from a point per dollar perspective, I like him the least.
All right, as you are hearing this, get those final submissions in. We are around 30 seconds away from roster lock here, so make sure you don't get stuck with those placeholder lineups. Let's see. Scrolling through the chat, I don't see anything really that we missed. Jay Kearney had asked about Scary Terry for captain on DraftKings. That is obviously fine. Who's the best kicker? I think we both agree that Sly is the better option there of the 2, but both of them are certainly capable. So with that, we are rolling up on the lock. TJ, anything else from you before we call it a night?
Nope, that is it from me. 4 shows down, 0 to go. So we get to kind of relax here the rest of the night before we're back tomorrow. You know, RotoGrinders never stops with the content. Keith and Luch are going to be back for the pre-lock show tomorrow. Meansy and Dre are here for crunch time tomorrow night. And so make sure you're tuning in tomorrow for some great content as well, while Cards and I wipe our hands and take a little day off.
Yeah, always busy on the weekends, and day off on Monday sounds just fine by me. So we will be rested up and ready to go the next time our names are called. And again, check back tomorrow for our usual NBA slate of shows and Monday Night Football talk here on RotoGrinders. Leave a like on the video as you exit. Subscribe to the channel if you want to. You can get a notification whenever we go live with all of our shows here at RotoGrinders. As always, thanks to TJ for joining me. I am Justin. Thanks to Steve for producing on the weekends for us as well. We appreciate his help as always. And we hope you enjoy the game tonight. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening. We'll be back at you tomorrow. Have a good night, everybody.